Hey everyone, I'm Martin Pickering and welcome to episode 2 of Cool Tech Tips and Tutorials. Last week we spoke about cool tech regarding batteries. This week it's time for RC tips. So let's get straight into it with tip number 1. How many times have you tried gluing something that's in a difficult place to reach and your glue drop manages to work its way down your glue stick, fall off somewhere that you didn't want to get glue, and you end up not gluing what you actually wanted to? Well, this is a cool little trick which I learned during one of my stays in India thanks to Rinku, who showed it to me. And it involves wrapping your glue in paper to make a funnel, taping it together, and then squirting it out almost like a syringe into exactly where you wanted it. Of course, you could use a syringe, but who has those hanging about? A piece of paper and a bit of tape is easy to come by. So it doesn't matter what kind of glue we're going to use, we just squirt some into one corner of our piece of paper. We now fold our piece of paper into a triangle shape, making a cone, and with our sticky tape, simply tape that together. Cut off any excess, and then we cut the tip off the triangle to allow us to squirt the glue out of a fine nozzle. Finally, just squeeze and glue whatever you need to glue. If, like Rinku, you want to receive a shout out in one of my videos, make sure to leave your best RC tips in the comments below and I will choose the best ones to include in future videos. RC tip number 2, attaching your servo leads. Now, this may seem like an unusual one. However, depending on what model it is that you're building, you may be more or less worried about keeping it light, despite the fact that a lighter plane always tends to fly better. This rings especially true when you're building a 3D jet such as my J10. In that model I wanted to keep it as light as was humanly possible. So I didn't want to use a load of cable ties and all the usual bases with cable ties, and I'm not really keen on the foam padded supports either. So I did the easiest, simplest and lightest thing possible, which was simply to wrap some masking tape around the servo lead itself and just with a single drop of cyano on the actual masking tape glue it into place. Now I always use Powerbox Premium lead because it's extremely resistant anyway, so I don't normally put it into anything else, and that meant that with no added weight I just had the odd piece of masking tape and drop of cyano. If at any point you wish to remove the lead, you can simply pull it off and it will actually come off quite easily, and then you simply remove the masking tape from the wire and that as well will be as new because the cyano has never been in contact with the actual wire itself. This allows for a very light setup as well as keeping it very simple, very tidy and ideal when looking for lightness. RC tip number 3. Now this may be a really easy one and a lot of you out there probably already know it. So if you do, skip to the next one. But anyone who doesn't is really going to appreciate this one. And it's how to cut round objects. Now this may sound unusual, but if you ever need to cut copper tubing for a hinge line or for your fuel tank or carbon rod for a foamy or any other kind of reinforcement, you'll know that if you use a saw it makes a right mess of the job, and you can't use pliers or side cutters, especially with copper tubing, because it will simply squash it. The simple answer is, without getting into really complicated or Dremel machines, you simply need a knife and a cutting mat or basically any kind of flat surface and roll it while applying pressure. After rolling it a couple of times, it will actually cut all the way through. It will make a really nice clean cut and it will be as if it was machine cut like that in the first place. Ready to use wherever you want without squashing, flattening or sawing anything. RC tips number 4. Now this one I get contacted about quite regularly. It's when a servo or surface starts jittering or shaking. It usually happens to be the rudder, however it can apply to any surface, be it elevator or ailerons. Is it because you're using a low quality servo? No, it isn't. Even the best brands, their top of the line servos can have this issue, and it's nothing wrong with the actual servo itself. What's happening is we're normally using quite a long servo arm, going onto a ball link, onto a rod, onto another ball link, onto a rather large surface, a rudder. Now, because of any minimal amount of slop, which is inevitable when there's so many links, the servo is basically struggling to find the exact centre because the rudder has some inertia to it, the ball links have a little bit of slop in them, the servo arm has some minimal slop, even if it's a tiny amount, and all of that just means it's struggling to get the exact centre that it wants to find for you. As soon as you apply some force to that surface, it stops moving. And that's exactly what happens when you take off. The airflow over the surface actually stops it from shaking. It's applying force to it in the same way as you do with your fingers. So there's no problem with flying. However, it looks absolutely terrible when you're sitting on the ground and your rudder's going this. So what's the solution? It's amazingly simple. It's Velcro. Just stick a small amount of the furry side of Velcro onto the rudder in a way that it contacts the surface that doesn't move. That's going to create a tiny amount of friction between the rudder and the fixed fin, which is going to prevent it from shaking. Sure, it may last 50, 100 or 200 flights and start shaking again. When that happens, simply remove the worn out furry Velcro and replace it with another piece of furry Velcro, and you're good to go for another 50, 100 or 150 flights. Just make sure not to put the other side of the Velcro on the other side of the surface. The idea is we're not using Velcro to stick. It's just because it's furry, it's soft, but it creates a little bit of friction, which is all we need to stop that jittering. RC tip number 5, and this is my favourite of this whole video. It's one that I use every single time I install a servo, and it just means that you can get the whole process done a whole lot quicker, especially if you have big fingers. When you install a new servo, you first have to attach all the rubber parts and the copper inserts. Now, depending on what servo you're using, those copper inserts may be very difficult to fit into the rubber parts once they're on the servo, because the tolerances are just too tight and you end up dropping them, they go everywhere, you hurt your fingers, it just isn't a pleasurable experience. Well, I discovered that if you take a small Allen key, possibly a small copper tube to fit over the Allen key if necessary because it's a little bit too long, and you then insert those copper inserts onto the end of the Allen key, you can very easily and very quickly insert those into the servo in a matter of seconds. There's no risk of dropping them all over the floor, they're very easy to fit in, and no matter how tight that tolerance is, they can fit in really quickly and really easily, and just push them as hard as necessary until they're in place. And that's it for this week's episode of Cool Tech Tips and Tutorials. It's been dedicated to RC tips, so if you have any of your own, make sure to leave them in the comments below, as I'd love to read them and take inspiration for future videos. Don't forget to tune in next Tuesday for the next episode, and if you haven't already, subscribe to get reminded about it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next week. I'm Martin Pickering, and I really hope that you've enjoyed this video. Make sure to come back every Tuesday for a new episode of Cool Tech Tips and Tutorials, and on Sundays for flying videos and event coverage. Or hit that subscribe button and the bell that's next to it in order to receive a reminder when the next video is uploaded. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.